Hello. In this session, we are going to understand the directional transient ground fault. First of all, let's understand what's transient ground fault. Suppose that we have a feeder or maybe a transmission line, and suppose that in this feeder or maybe in a transmission line, some transient ground fault occurs. It means some faults occur in this transmission line which is transient in nature and it disappears immediately. So it's happening and then goes out. Mostly this type of the faults occur due to the trees and veins in overhead lines and maybe due to the isolation deterioration of the underground cables. And our device is installed in the bus A. Here we have CTs and PTs and relays. Our relay should detect this type of the faults and to differentiate and to give us the chance whether to trip off the circuit breaker in this line or not. In this type of the conditions where a transient fault occurs in our transmission line. Here we are focusing on transmission line. Mostly this type of transient ground fault occurs in the distribution feeders, and in distribution feeders mostly in underground cables. This function is mostly used on that stage. Now let's understand the logic behind of this function, that how the relay detects this type of the faults and how the relay decide the direction of this type of the faults and how the relay give us the chance whether to trip into this type of the faults or maybe should not trip. The logic behind this type of the function is divided in three portions. The first portion is what really the relay does before the fault, when there is no fault at all. The next portion is what the relay does after happening of the fault. And the third portion is what the relay does when the fault goes out or there is no fault after detection of a fault. Relay continuously, without happening of the fault, continuously every time the relay takes the V0t, it means instantaneous values of zero sequence voltage and instantaneous value of zero sequence current from the CT and from the PT. And the relay samples this data which takes from the CT and PT, samples these data, and the rate of that sample is 8 kilohertz. It means at the rate of 8 kilohertz the relay takes these values and samples at the rate of 8 kilohertz, and these values are supplied to another function block. The sampled value of the instantaneous zero sequence current, which is sampled at the rate of 8 kilohertz, is directly supplied to a function block of the direction determination block. And the instantaneous, the sampled value of instantaneous zero sequence voltage is supplied to another block which is called the T0 block. This block determines the exact time of happening of transient ground fault. It means it detects the T0. We call it block A. Let's understand how this block A works. Let's consider our previous example that we have a transmission line between bus bar A or B, and the relay is connected through the PT, and we have at normal condition at the secondary without any fault at the normal condition at the secondary of PT maybe we have 1 point something volt zero sequence voltage. It is called the operational zero sequence voltage or V0 operational. And now if we consider that the fault occurs in the system, a transient ground fault occurs. Now in this type of the fault, in this condition which fault is occurred, now the zero sequence voltage immediately goes very high, for example 3 or maybe 4 volts, and it detects immediately, it detects the time of happening of any transient fault. On that moment, the time which this transient ground fault occurs in the system, we call this time as T0. As the V0, it means the zero sequence voltage is very sensitive to the happening of the fault in the system, we use the zero sequence voltage for detection of exact time of happening of the fault. That was the task that the block A does. And after that, when the fault is detected by the block A, then one signal is sent to another register. Sorry, it's going to an SR latch block, and this S terminal is latched. Then the signal is supplied to the direction determination block and also supplied to another portion. For discussing to another portion where this signal goes and what happens in these blocks, we will discuss in the next sessions.